We've got some difficult days ahead. But it really doesn't matter with me now, because I've been to the mountaintop. Like anybody, I would like to live a long life. Longevity has its place. But I'm not concerned about that now. I just want to do God's will. And He's allowed me to go up to the mountain. And I've looked over. And I've seen the promised land. I may not get there with you, but I want you to know tonight that we as a people will get to the promised land. So I'm happy tonight. I'm not worried about anything. I'm not fearing any man. Mine eyes have seen the glory of the coming of the Lord.
A solemn one, and that we remember 50 years ago, a great American man's life and his movement was tragically cut short by a single bullet in Memphis, Tennessee. And that's Dr. Martin Luther King. But tonight, we are continuing a movement against the plague of gun violence that kills over 30,000 Americans every year. And some of us here tonight have been directly impacted by this plague. One such guest is Linda Beagle Tillman. Linda lost her son Scott at the Parkland shooting. Those who may know the story of Scott, Scott was a teacher who put his life behind the students in his classroom. He's a true hero. And Linda, I know how difficult it is for you to come here tonight, and really appreciate it, and would like you to say a few words.
Did you hear there was a shooting? My husband called me and said, you need to come home. On the way home, I heard on the news that a geography teacher who taught cross-country was shot. I stand in front of you today because I'm a mother whose son was murdered, but I'm also a mother on a mission, okay? I spent 4 weeks with the students in Parkland and the staff members and law enforcement, and we have a movement that we need to continue. The students are amazing. They were amazing in Washington. They're still amazing. They're going for it in Florida day after day. But we are not just Florida. We are all of the United States. We need to get the people from the right and the people from the left to meet us in the middle. We need the people to meet us in the middle because this is human. We are humanity. We need to fix this. We need to get control of the weapons, the guns. We need gun control. We need to do whatever we can. And for me, for you, for all the students, for everybody, for all of the human people, we need to fix this. And I'm begging you to let me help you and you help me to make sure we get gun control under control, no matter what it takes to do.
Prayers back to you and your family. We'd like to take a moment of silence for Scott Beagle, a true hero, and all the thousands of others that are killed by senseless gun violence every year. A number of my colleagues called and felt the pain of the families and the troubles and the passions that you just heard Linda speak about. You know, felt frustrated that they wanted to do something, wanted to change this terrible epidemic that has been infecting our country. And they're talking about setting up new foundations, setting up new PACs, setting up new organizations. And as I was hearing all that, it dawned on me that that's not the way to be successful, because you're competing against a very focused, concentrated organization that consolidates one message very effectively and is forcing change. And with the impetus of this get-together was, I said, don't do that. Don't set up anything new. Let's go to the things that work. Because there are organizations that has spent a lot of time studying and building ground games and figuring out how to actually execute change that we should get behind rather than having a fragmented approach to a unified end on the other side. And so that was really the premise that brings us here tonight, because you can see people with thirsting for a way in which they could promote change to this horrific circumstance that we've been going through. You know, for me, it was after Sandy Hook that I started to get involved in gun safety. December 14, 2012, as a gunman, went into a school and killed 20 first graders and 6 adults. And at the time, you think that something that horrific has to compel Congress, has to compel them to actually do something reasonable, to try to put some reasonable gun safety measure forward. We had a president who was fully committed to going out and using the power of that office to enforce gun safety. A common sense proposal that was sponsored by a Democrat and Republican that would have mandated basic background checks for every gun purchase failed in the United States Senate. And that's where Congress still stands today, powerless and paralyzed as it relates to addressing our nation's gun violence epidemic. Yet we still have the same gun laws today that were in place on the day that the gun walked into Sandy Hook Elementary. And in that time, there have been more and more mass shootings, more senseless gun violence, and more deaths. It was a little over a month ago when a gunman walked into Parkland in Florida. And you say to yourself, how does this happen? These children were experiencing the exact same feelings. And I realized that I relived that sense of trauma after every mass shooting, after Las Vegas, after Orlando, after San Bernardino, after Charleston, after Sandy Hook, Sutherland Springs, Fort Hood, Dallas, Washington, D.C., a list that sadly goes on and on. The only comfort that our federal leaders have been able to offer them is thoughts and prayers. We have to do better than that. We have to do better than that for all the victims of gun violence and their loved ones. Every day, 96 people are killed at the hands of guns. Look, I count myself as a strong supporter of the Second Amendment, and I know there are millions of gun-owning Americans who use their guns safely, whose friends use their guns safely, and whose children never have access to guns when they're not supposed to. But we're facing a gun violence crisis, and we should respond to this crisis with the same level of determination and resolve that we demonstrated after 9/11. This means putting aside the politics of division and coming together as a country and uniting against an epidemic. When the NRA shouts about freedom, I say freedom isn't free. There are limits. We put sensible limits on everything, from free speech, from free press, from driving cars to buying alcohol. And that's because absolute freedom with no limits creates chaos. If our children are afraid to go to school, we aren't free if they're afraid to go to church. We aren't free if they're afraid to go to a concert. We aren't free if they're afraid to go to movies or an office building. Now, there are some who say that it's not our gun laws that need to be changed, but instead we should focus on the moral failings of those who carry out gun violence. There's a prescient passage in one of Dr. King's speeches that is particularly germane to our nation's gun violence epidemic. And Dr. King said, "It may be true that morality cannot be legislated, but behavior can be regulated. We recognize that there is no single law that can prevent gun violence, but we should heed the words of Dr. King and take action to change the habits of men, and then the attitudes and hearts will follow." And that's why we're here this evening. We're here to take action and take steps in the way to fighting gun violence. Dr. King speaks to the ability that within all of us, there's an ability within all of us, which is to serve. And that's what the movement to end gun violence is all about. If we are ever to overcome the plague of gun violence in America, then all of us must step up. Moms have stepped up, students and children have stepped up, and now it's time for business leaders to step up. There isn't a single person or company that will bring an end to gun violence, but all of us working together to make a safer world. And now I'd like to turn it over to someone who has stepped up and stepped up in a big way, John Feinblatt from Marytown. John?
We all know that today marks 50 years since Martin Luther King's assassination. Today is also the 50th day since Parkland, and address what I think is happening today, certainly in the 50 days since Parkland. For those of you who know Mike Bloomberg, you may know that a piece of data is worth 1,000 words to him. And one piece of data that I think convinced him that he had to become active on this issue was that 90% of the guns that we were recovering on the streets of New York at crime scenes were guns that were sold from out of state. And so what that meant was that regardless of the fact that the laws in New York State were strong and the laws in New York City were particularly strong, we were actually being victimized by states that surrounded us that had lax gun laws. Because in fact, there's a marketplace in this country, and states with lax gun laws actually end up exporting guns that are used in crimes to states like New York with strong gun laws. 90% of the crime guns that were landing on the streets of New York were from out of state. He had no choice but to get involved in this issue nationally. The truth is that both Republicans and Democrats in Washington, D.C. had truthfully walked away from this issue. The DNA of both parties was too hot to handle. And so the question that we had to ask ourselves originally was, how do you build a political class? And what we realized was that mayors of cities looked at this issue very differently than congresspeople or senators. We made two very key decisions that I think were the right decisions then and continue to be. And one was to go state by state. And in 2014, we merged our mayor's efforts with our mom's effort, which is what created Everytown for Gun Safety. Those two decisions have made a significant difference in the gun safety movement. 26 states now have laws making it harder for domestic abusers to buy guns. Almost 50% of the American public lives now in states with universal background checks. Red flag laws are beginning to take hold as you saw happen after Parkland in Florida. And progress is actually being made state by state. And that progress is what we believe will eventually move Congress to act. Parkland has had a huge impact on the American psyche. The American public actually supports gun safety. The problem here is not convincing the public. The problem here is breaking the political logjam. And the way to do it is by having mayors, moms, students, survivors, and businesses all coming together. And I am so proud to say, Debbie Weir left Mothers Against Drunk Driving to join Everytown and Moms Demand Action as the Director of Engagement. So that's karma for you. Debbie?
I will tell you that my passion, compassion, and our organization is really focused on victims, survivors of gun violence that are always preventable, deaths, injuries. Moms Demand Action is the grassroots arm of our organization. Our grass tops arm, the Everytown for Gun Safety. We have experts on research and policy and legal and what positions should we have and why do they work, and really working on the things that work. But in just 5 years, Moms Demand Action, we have chapters in all 50 states. Pre-Parkland, we had 75,000 active volunteers and 4.5 million supporters. Moms Demand Action and Everytown for Gun Safety have helped pass 25 states pass legislation that keeps guns out of the hands of domestic abusers. In 8 states, we have worked to pass legislation requiring background check on all gun sales. Since 2013, we have worked diligently to convince major American businesses, including Target, Starbucks, and Facebook, to enact gun sense policies to keep their customers safe from gun violence. We've had more than 150,000 Americans now become Moms Demand Action volunteers. But we have men, we have fathers, we have grandparents, we have brothers and sisters. You do have to get laws changed. It is about getting legislation passed. And it's really about those laws being based on what are the most effective, evidence-based approaches that's going to save the most lives. But then you get a law passed, then you have to follow and work on what's the enforcement of that law. So how is law enforcement enforcing the law? But the other pieces in changing the culture is education and public awareness. We have to keep doing this public awareness that there is a way to own a gun. How many guns do you need to own? What type of guns? All of that goes into it. But again, if you are a gun owner, how are you a responsible gun owner? The biggest key to changing culture and building safer communities is never forgetting the victims and survivors. There's two things that you can do immediately. Please pull out your phones and text JOIN to 64433 to become a member of our grassroots movement. Text JOIN, J-O-I-N, to 64433. And then please email businessleaders@everytown.org to learn more about what you and your company do to help save lives.
I'd now like to have the opportunity to introduce you to Secretary Jay Johnson. When our founding fathers talked about the best and brightest sacrificing, doing things for themselves in the private sector to be there for our country, Jay epitomizes what they were thinking about. We're incredibly honored to have him here tonight. Jay Johnson, Secretary.
Time is now almost exactly 6:30 Eastern Time, 5:30 Central Time in Memphis, Tennessee, April 4th, 2018. It was therefore exactly 1/2 century plus 1/2 hour that the man Walter Cronkite referred to that evening as the apostle of nonviolence in the civil rights movement was killed while standing on a balcony of the Lorraine Motel in Memphis. No one, no matter where he lives or what he does, can be certain who will suffer from some senseless act of bloodshed. And yet it goes on and on. It is not a Texas problem. It is not a Florida problem or a Connecticut problem. It is not just a school safety problem. It is not a global problem. It is an American problem. Gun violence is unnatural on God's earth. On God's earth, children should bury their parents. Parents should not have to bury their children. Ladies and gentlemen, you are here tonight because you want change. The man we remember tonight, Martin Luther King, understood how the people can create change. We forget that Martin Luther King was controversial. He pushed people out of their comfort zones. The lesson for all of us who want change is that we are challenging powerful interests and entrenched status quo. To bring about change, we must be prepared to leave our comfort zones, knock others out of theirs, and make them mad. You must be prepared to, as King said, apply pressure where it really hurts. In our efforts, we have good reason to be optimistic. There is reason for hope. Do not lose faith. This country is great, and it never stopped being great for its capacity to accept monumental change, unimaginable progress, and a more perfect union. Thank you.
The program tonight was there to provide the tools for all of you, for all of us to get involved. There's places that you can go that your energy is going to be added to other people's energy and be that much more powerful along the way. And then one of the things that we're going to be doing, working with Mike Bloomberg over the next couple of months, is getting businesses involved. Because if you really want to start seeing change is getting the free market and the powers of that free market to start forcing that change. And when credit card companies start saying we're not going to sell, honor a place that sell illegal guns, or areas that we see with Walmart and Dick's Sporting Goods saying you're not going to sell guns to people that are under 21 or that don't pass background checks, that's what starts creating change. We at OXR have been doing that. You've been seeing one of our buildings, which in our Light and Night campaign, where we lit it orange for 58 days in respect of the 58 victims of Las Vegas, and we had 100 other buildings, iconic buildings around the country, to light their buildings orange for those 58 days, to start forcing that change. You know, the goal going forward is to actually go out and get a compact set up that businesses around the United States sign on a compact for what they can do to promote gun safety. They know their business is best, and then know the way that they can have the greatest impact. And all that we would ask is they file for with us of what they're doing so we can measure their challenge, their success. Justice Louis Brandeis, had a quote that I always refer to, and he said that the most important political office is that of private citizen. And we can't rely on our elected officials to promote this change, because as the Secretary said, that is really difficult. So we need to rely on ourselves to force that change. So let's make this year, 2018, the year that we force that change. And thank you all for coming and for your time.
Sisters and brothers, I have a dream today. This is our hope. We will be able to hew out of the mountain of despair a stone of hope. With this faith, we will be able to transform the jangling discords of our nation into a beautiful symphony of brotherhood. Let freedom ring, and when this happens, and when we allow freedom ring, when we let it ring from every village and every hamlet, from every state and every city, we will be able to speed up that day when all of God's children, black men and white men, Jews and Gentiles, Protestants and Catholics, will be able to join hands and sing in the words of the old Negro spiritual, free at last, thank God Almighty, we are free at last.